Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I am a former Ohio State cheerleader. I cheered on the Ohio State cheer team in 2016 through 2020, and I'm also a former USA cheerleader. So I cheered on the USA co-ed team in 2018 to 2019. Now I'm a doctor of physical therapy and a strength coach for cheerleaders and cheer teams. I own the business called The Cheer Doctor, where we help cheerleaders and cheer teams go from good to great through physical therapy and strength and conditioning services. Today, I want to talk to you all about the vital role of strength training for your cheerleaders, but also how to incorporate and implement a structured and consistent program. Because we know when it comes to strength training, structure and consistency is one of the most important parts if you're going to have a program that helps your athletes in the long term. So we'll just jump right in. I wanted to start with saying that it's our mission to transform the sport of cheerleading. Cheerleading has had a lot of exciting growth in the past few years, being recognized by the Olympic Committee, and hopefully one day we'll be in the Olympics competing. And I think this brings a whole nother level to our sport and an importance in just upping what we do in terms of training for our cheerleaders. And additionally, I think we need to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So I think it's a big problem in cheerleading right now. A lot of teams are underserved, underfunded, and there's teams that are recognized as a sport under their athletic program, teams like Ohio State, big D1 schools, and they're winning all the time. They got all these resources under their belt that they can use. And then we have other teams at the high school level, but even at the college level, where they're not recognized, they don't get resources, they don't get funding, and they're kind of left in the dust. And it's really hard for these schools to catch up to where these other schools are that have the resources because they're recognized as a sport. And so my goal is really another mission of the Cheer Doctor is to close this gap and offer more resources to teams that otherwise wouldn't have access to them. We've talked about this. So all other athletes are training in the weight room, and for some reason, cheer becomes left out. We'll talk about there's many different reasons for this. Underfunding is one of them. Sometimes strength and conditioning coaches don't really know what to do with their cheerleaders. It hasn't been normalized in our sport before, so most people just don't use it, but we need to be. And then we need to change the mentality of strength training for cheerleading to really elevate us to the next level. So this is what I was trying to say. With cheer now being recognized as a sport by the Olympic Committee, we need to take it to the next level and we need to start taking ourselves more seriously. So my goal for us for this presentation is to teach you how to implement a superior strength training program for the betterment of your athletes and our sport as a whole. For those who are beginners, I try to really condense this information so that you'll get a guide to the strength and conditioning basics for athletes. And for those of you who are more experienced, you'll learn how to take your programming to the next level. I also want to pause and say, don't worry about taking too many notes during this presentation. At the end, I'll have a QR code that you can scan to get a link to this presentation. You'll get a link to a strength training checklist for cheer coaches. And then you'll also get a video of the USA Cheer warm-up routine we used to do before practice. So don't worry, I'm going to provide you with this information when we're done. So what we learned today, first we're going to do a little bit of a brief introduction about me and my background. Then we'll talk about what I consider to be strength training secrets that other high-level cheer teams aren't telling you, or maybe you just don't know about. The first one is that weight training is for all cheerleaders. Number 2 is how to have expert programming. And then number 3 is how to create consistency, because that can be one of the most challenging aspects of a program, but also the most important. And how to improve your team's overall abilities by adding a strength training program without creating more work for yourself. So I'll get to this a little bit more in the end on how you go about implementing a program without creating a whole lot of work for yourself. So we don't have an actual poll here, but I just wanted you guys to take a moment to think, what kinds of things have you tried in the past when it comes to strength and conditioning for your cheerleaders? Maybe you've tried conditioning after practice, running miles, cardio for punishment, other training programming sheets, or here's a big one, strength training during the summer and then neglecting it the rest of the year. So which one of these things have you tried? What do you feel like has worked well, hasn't worked? Start thinking about some of these before we move on to the next slide. Okay, so you probably realize that a lot of these things didn't stick or work that well, and I just want to mention that it is not your fault. So there's a lot of myths when it comes to strength training. Lots of programming apps, or only, like if you're not using somebody who is specific to cheerleading and you're just using a generic app, a lot of them program conditioning but not strength training, or they just aren't specific enough to cheerleading to know what we do. Um, I want to mention conditioning and cardio is not the key to success because as a young cheerleader in high school, I thought I just wanted to run all the time, be super conditioned, and it looked like I was in great shape, but it was not the key to my success. We needed to add strength training. There are many myths revolving around the weight room and weight training that are confusing and not necessarily true. And as a coach, it's not your job to be as a cheer coach, it's not your job to be the strength and conditioning coach. And navigating these myths and knowing what to do can be very difficult. Um, Additionally, I understand having athletes do some sort of conditioning for punishment, but the problem is that your athletes that are high level, elite, or want to be really good aren't going to see that as punishment. I used to love when we would do any sort of conditioning at practice because I knew that it was making me better, and it was one of the only times. Like even if we were getting punished, it was one of the only times that we ever did conditioning. So I would be excited for it. So I don't know if it really worked in terms of like the punishment, and we really, in order for it to be consistent, we don't want athletes to view working out as a punishment always. We want them to be able to enjoy their workouts so that they can continue to do it on their own and see the benefits in it. And then additionally, athletes need a year round plan to really get big benefits from a strength and conditioning program. So it's easier to do it in the summer because you have more time. But if you're working out really hard in the summer and then neglecting it the rest of the year, when you get back to the summer again, you're starting at ground zero. You're not really getting better year over year. And then I also want to mention that cheer coaches are, of course, overworked and underpaid and already work many hours outside of their contract. And so it is not your job to be the strength and conditioning coach. This is a full-time yearly salary position for most programs. So no wonder it's a lot of work for you to do on top of your already pretty much full-time job trying to coach cheerleading. The good news is that there's an easy solution to administering a year-round program for your athletes that not only they will enjoy, but also will help them improve their cheer skills, reduce their amount of injuries, and teach them a way to stay fit when they leave their sport. So again, we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end. I'm going to try to quickly go through my background. I think it's important that you know a little bit about me and why I started this business in order to get more out of the presentation, but I'll try to go through this quickly. So one, I already mentioned I'm a physical therapist, cheered, blah, 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 blah. Backstory. So in high school, I already told you I was doing a lot of conditioning, I was running track, and I was cheering, but I was constantly injured and constantly had this hip and back pain that wouldn't go away when I was running and tumbling. I wanted to make a high level cheer team like Ohio State, and I wanted to be improving my cheer skills, but I couldn't because I was constantly hurt and it was always setting me back. The athletic trainers at the school, they oversee all the sports. So they're not specific to cheerleading and they don't have time to really give all the athletes the one-on-one attention that sometimes they need. They had me foam rolling, ice, heat, rest, or tape, and they were extremely helpful while I was in practice. But it would just be a temporary fix for practice. And then once I would leave and start to try to run again, I would just go back to being hurt. So I tried all different things at home. I was doing an app where I was having me do like body weight conditioning at home. And it really looked like I was in great shape, but something was still missing and I was still getting injured all the time. Eventually, I tried weight training in the gym and I started to notice a decrease in my pain levels and an increase in my performance. But I didn't have anybody guiding me. I was just doing this on my own. I was very inconsistent, wasn't sure what to do in the gym. And I was constantly quitting and then restarting again because I was afraid of getting bulky. So I saw a little bit of a progress in the gym, but I was a small flyer. I was afraid that I was going to get too big to cheer in a college cheer team if I kept lifting. So I was very inconsistent. And then I realized if I kept going at the rate that I would get hurt all the time and get burned out of cheerleading. Luckily, back in the day when I was trying out for the Ohio State cheer team, it wasn't quite as hard to get on the team as it is now. I made the team and I quickly learned about the power of having mentors and all of the resources that I could possibly think of at our disposal. So this is when I first met our strength coaches and they got me on a consistent program to hold me accountable where I was lifting with the team 2 times a week. I had some ups and downs in those first 6 months, some injuries while I was at Ohio State, ankle sprains here and there. But after 6 months into our strength conditioning program with OSU, I really started to feel like a whole nother person. I felt so much stronger. I no longer had those aches and pains that I was getting before. And I was able to go from not even being able to do a low to high hand in hand with the best guy on the team to practicing hand skis. So I had a pretty drastic turnaround, and I attribute a lot of that to somebody finally getting me in on a consistent strength and conditioning program. I felt like I had uncovered the key to success, and I made a goal to try out for Team USA. So I went from not being able to hit a simple hand in hand stunt with the best guy on the team to making Team USA less than 2 years later and no longer nagging injuries. So fast forward a lot more years, I got certified, became a doctor of physical therapy, and started teaching others what I know. Here are just some quick results that some people have experienced. The University of Toledo was struggling to get into the weight room because they're also not given these resources under their school, and so they used my program in a flexible way that I can explain a little bit later. And then other high schools have noticed their younger athletes start to get stronger and mature a little bit faster. And one year is a OSU cheer commit for this year. She started working with me because she had a back pain, a very similar story to mine, and she kind of had the same kind of realization that I did, that weightlifting helped her with her back pain and also helped her unlock her skills. So I felt like I'd found the secret to success. It can improve my cheer skills, reduce injuries. I didn't feel burnt out. Still had time for school and friends. Still enjoyed the sport. Went from cardio queen and injury prone to an avid lifter with the passion to help others. All right, now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, the strength training secrets that maybe or maybe not you don't know about already. Okay. So secret number one is that strength weight training is for all cheerleaders. So, I mean, all cheerleaders, flyers and bases. Both of these groups need to be lifting heavy enough to see adaptations. Lifting heavy does not inherently make somebody bulky. A big mistake that I see is people following a bodybuilding program, which is, we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like later. But they follow a bodybuilding program, strictly lifting, rather than using an athletic hybrid program, which is what I usually use for most of my athletes, where you're lifting, but you're also sprinting, doing powerful dynamic movements, etc. And then I wanted to give a quick note on sport-specific training, especially for youth athletes. Many younger athletes want to go directly to sports specific training, like this meme shows, kind of stepping over all these other steps you need to do before you do sports specific training because it looks cool. They think that's what's going to help them the most. But in reality, we really need to just work on the basics of building strength before you can move on to these skills, drills, and other sports specific training. And then I also say it's for all cheerleaders, to mention that one, it's for bases and flyers, and two, you can have your young athletes weight training with proper supervision and a proper plan. It's not dangerous for you to have your younger athletes, middle school, even elementary school age, starting to use the weight room, even if it's just starting with light dumbbells, light kettlebells, just getting them used to the movements. Athletes put 12 to 15, or cheerleaders put 12 to 15 times their body weight in force through their joints when they are tumbling. And they're not going to even reach close to that with lifting weights. And so there's really no risk for growth plate injury if you're doing this properly. There's a lot of myths that younger athletes should wait until they're a certain age to start lifting, but none of that's really true. So I just wanted to mention that briefly here too. Overall, weightlifting helps reduce injury risk by building strength, teaches athletes a new skill for life. So this is important because our cheerleaders won't necessarily all cheer when they leave high school or college even. That's not very common for people to have a career in cheerleading. And so we want to teach them a way that they can stay healthy and fit later in life without having to rely on tumbling, stunting, things that they will no longer do. It builds confidence, especially in young females. I know so many of my young females that I worked with before were afraid to go into the weight room because it's just usually a male dominated space. And now that they've kind of learned the basics, they feel like they have a place in that weight room and they feel more confident and comfortable using it for themselves. Creates higher jumps, sharper motions, safer stunts. If you're a stunting school and you're not weight training, I think that's one of the first things that you should look into adding as a program. And then it helps cheerleaders see themselves as athletes and builds camaraderie and better buy-in. So I've seen a lot of Facebook forums or groups posting about cheerleaders showing up to practice in jeans or not taking it seriously, not showing up to practice at all. Having a consistent program like this in place where they use the weight room will reduce that by helping them to see themselves more as athletes, not going to wear jeans into a weight room. Um, and they're going to learn how to work together as a team in a way that is somewhat different than your normal practice time. And they're going to all be learning something new together. Most of them are probably not done a whole lot with the weight room if you're at the high school level. And it's fun for them to be able to do something together and build camaraderie. Okay, so here is the framework and the basics. So you want to have these 6 ingredients for any strength training program. So we'll go through the ingredients first. Squat. This is also pictured in the left bottom corner in order 1 through 6. So if everybody would take a moment to stand up, you can practice each of these movements. The first one is a squat. So I'm showing a heel tap exercise where I'm standing on one leg, but you can also just think of your simple body weight squat, squatting down, standing back up. A squat is really any movement where you're using the front of your leg muscles or when you're pushing off of the ground with your legs. A hinge is like an RDL, a deadlift. You're just thinking of bending over at the waist and then coming back up. Kettlebell swings, you can think of multiple different variations for the hinge. A push, think push up. A pull, think row or pull up. Core, there's lots of different ways you can do core exercises. It could be dynamic explosive like a V-up. It can be stabilization like a dead bug like I'm showing in that picture. Or it can be something like a farmer's carry, which is also brings me to the last one, a carry. So a carry is good for 2 things. It helps with your core stability, but it also helps with your wrist strength. I know so many cheerleaders have problems with their wrists because they're constantly bounding and tumbling on them or holding somebody's foot in their hands and it being flexed back. There's not a whole lot of time where cheerleaders focus on their grip strength unless they're in a gym holding weights. So a carry is super important for cheerleaders as well. And then over here on the side, I have as bonus, a lot of the way I make my programs unique to bases versus flyers is probably different than what most people think of. Bases and flyers both need to be lifting heavy, but bases will have a little bit more of an emphasis on upper extremity strength or preventative exercises for like rotator cuff tears. And then flyers will have a little bit more emphasis on single leg balance and maybe some explosive core movements for rewinds or other skills that they might need. Then additionally, I have the system over here. It has to be enjoyable, somewhat enjoyable. So like you can't take out the pain of lifting, but you can add the pleasure of seeing yourself progress from week to week. It has to have consistency. You need to be doing it probably multiple times a week, definitely year round. And that has to have accountability. So a lot of athletes struggle to keep themselves accountable. Some people can, but other people need to have a group or some kind of system to keep them accountable. Here's a sample workout week for the summer. I'm just going to briefly go over this. So I sometimes organize my lifts into push, pull, and accessory. For push, you can think of squat and push. These movements are kind of lumped together. And then for pull, you think of hinge and pull, and you lump those 2 together. So we have a front squat, a push-up, and a plank. So these letters in front of the workout is just meant to group them together. So you're supposed to do a set of 8 of the front squat, then a set of 10 to 12 of the push-up, then a set of 45 seconds for the plank. Then you go back up to the front squat to complete your second set all the way through, and then finish your third set before moving on to the B group. Then we have a walking lunge, a shoulder press, and a V-up. And then for the finisher, I like to do some kind of sprint. So a 400-meter sprint or an 800-meter bike sprint would be the equivalent of that. Lots of teams there's nothing wrong with having your team run a mile. I think that's good for building general endurance. But if you want them to have a little bit more cheer routine specific endurance, you also want to make sure you're including sprints and higher intensity cardio. A mile isn't considered high intensity. That would just be considered more like a longer duration. Wednesday, we have a pull day. So we have RDL, We have a single arm dumbbell row, an ab rollout, then we have a Nordic hamstring curl, a lat pull down, and a body saw for abs. And then for the finisher, we have a squat Tabata. So squat Tabata tests your leg endurance, and that's the one I love to do with cheerleaders. It's 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off of as many squats as you can do for 8 rounds. And then Friday is just an accessory day, anything else that I feel like we might have missed or that I want to work on more. So I want to start with the conditioning so that we can get the most out of it in the beginning. So either a sprint and push-up circuit, like for example, a 2.5 minute AMRAP, meaning as many rounds as possible of a 100-meter sprint and 5 push-ups. So you'd set a timer for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You'd have your athletes sprint 100 meters, do 5 push-ups, and complete as many rounds as they can in 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes or however long you want the timer to be for. And then, there you go. And then we have a 20-minute EMOM, which just means you're switching. It's just more like a circuit. You're switching continuously between the exercises, no break. And we have some movements like the Cossack squat, a TRX row, single leg RDL, a wall for power, and a med ball side pass at the wall for explosive rotational power. So I put this on here, one, so that you guys can look up some of the movements and use this if you would like to. But two, to show kind of the structure and thought process behind a program. Something else that is worth noting is that you want to try to have at least 10 sets per muscle group per week. And so if you count some of these up, so let's say we're a squat pattern, we're going to say is a muscle group. So the front squat, we got 3 sets there. A walking lunge would also count. We got 3 sets there. That makes 6. And then we can add the Cossack squat over here. We probably do 4 rounds. So we have about 10 sets for leg push, not even including the squat Tabata. And then for arms, we have push-up. For arms push, we have push-up, shoulder press, and a wall ball would also be a push. So we have at least 10 sets. And then we want to move on and look at the pulls. So you would count the sets for things like RDL, hamstring curl, and the single leg RDL would be grouped together. So there's a lot of method behind the madness here, and there's a lot of intricate details we can get into. I don't think it's as important that you know all of these details, but I thought I would mention it in case people are interested. Okay, I wanted to mention too that fancy drills are not going to work very well unless you already have a system in place for the basics. So a lot of people ask me like jump drills they can use to get their girls' jumps higher, but my best answer is honestly have your girls do weighted squats in the gym. Body weight squats will only work for so long, and before you need to add progressive overload, meaning you need to tax their body further to make further adaptations. And the 99% of high school cheerleaders that I see that have low jumps, they just have weak legs. I'm just going to be honest. Doing the leg lift drill where you're sitting on the ground is not going to help them. They need to be explosive off the ground. They need to be stronger. You really just need them to have the basics down better, especially at the high school and middle school level. Okay, we're going to move on to secret number 2, which is expert programming. So maybe you feel like you are afraid to program strength training because you've never lifted yourself, or you feel like you don't know proper technique, or you're afraid your athletes will get injured while lifting. So here are some things that you can do. Find somebody to program the lifts for you. Start with lightweight and gradually increase. So this is that progressive overload that I just mentioned. Have beginner athletes slow the movements down. That's the biggest problem. Beginners rush them. So if you have them slow them down and really think about what they're doing, it's going to help with their form. Realize that cheer itself is much more dangerous than weightlifting. I've seen people say in Facebook forums, stay out of the weight room. It's just a recipe for a disaster. Your girls are going to get injured there. But I don't think that could be further from the truth. Yes, you may get some injuries in the weight room. Are we going to completely avoid all injuries in our sport? No. But the amount of injuries that you will have from cheer itself is going to be much higher than any injuries that would happen in the weight room. And the weight room is really protective against injury, and that it's going to create less injuries from cheer practices. And so there's really no reason to be scared to go into the weight room. Just have your girls start slow and start light and then work your way up from there. Also recognize that everybody is different and everyone will look slightly different doing each lift, and that is okay. Just reinforce gradually increasing the weight and making sure that the athlete has control over the lift. So this leads me to my next point of, do you need to know perfect technique? So the short answer is no. And this might be somewhat controversial and shock some people, but there's really no evidence from my research in physical therapy school. This surprised me as well. There's no evidence so far, it is yet to be proven that one certain technique of lifting is preventative against injury. They've done studies with athletes that have what would be considered perfect form and athletes that have bad form, and they both get injured at the same rate. And so, stressing and being a perfectionist on their technique is not going to be the most helpful thing. Yes, having proper technique will help them become more efficient and more athletic, but it's not going to necessarily reduce injuries in the weight room. What does reduce injury risk in the weight room, and this has been studied and proven, is gradual progression of weight and load. So making sure the athlete has control over the lift, increased weight training experience of the athlete. So the longer they've been using the weight room, and then having a well-balanced program. So this is why it's super important to have somebody who knows what they're doing and is creating a well-balanced program for all body parts. And this is why excellent programming and then consistency is important to increase their training age. Additionally, you have to be bad at something before you can be good at it. So just remember this as you're going into the weight room with your athletes for the first time. If they've never been in there before, they are going to look bad. And you just need to keep working with them until they look good. Okay. So here is a framework for programming that is very generalized, but I think gives you the basics. So when you're thinking about a year-round schedule, you want to think about conditioning and muscle building in the summer. So this is lower weight, but higher reps. That's what builds muscle, lower weight, higher reps. Then as you get closer to your season, you want to start focusing on strength, which would be lower reps, higher weight. And then as you get into the bulk of your season, you want to work on power, which is still pretty high weight, but not quite as high as strength. And you're doing low repetitions, but for speed. Many people get this confused. They think they want to use lightweight during the season, excuse me, but you actually want to use heavy weight and just decrease the reps. So you're decreasing the amount of time that you're under tension and how taxing it is on your body by doing less reps, but you're also keeping that adaptation and stimulus that you gained over the summer by keeping the weight higher. So then rehab versus prehab, many people get these confused. It should not look like a physical therapy session in your weight room to prevent injuries. Prehab is actually heavy lifting and intense exercise to prepare your body for your sport. Rehab is using lighter weight because a muscle or a bone is injured and it cannot yet handle heavier weight. You don't want to use lightweight band exercises too much in the weight room to prevent injury unless it's for like a small rotator cuff problem somebody is having. You really want to be focusing on intense exercise and lifting heavier. So how to do this, you have to have excellent mentorship or programming. It can be helpful to have video reviews of lifts easily accessible to athletes. Allow for trial and error. So this goes back to remembering that they're going to look bad at it before they can be good at it. Allow them to kind of work through that on their own. Too much feedback can be a bad thing sometimes, so finding that balance of the appropriate amount of feedback. And then having consistency with the lift so that the athlete can get used to each movement and adapt. So I like to keep my workouts the same for 4 weeks at a time. So we might be doing something different on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but those are going to stay the same for 4 weeks at a time so the athlete can get used to the movement, they can increase weight, they can be comfortable, and they can go a little harder by the 4th week. So just some additional points. I tried to mention this before, but I explained it very convolutedly. Not participating in strength training will cause more future injuries than the number of injuries that would occur from weight training itself. So this goes back to being afraid to use the weight room because there's potential for injury risk in there. Just knowing that what you're doing in there is going to prevent more injuries than it would cause. And then perfection is the biggest progress killer. It can cause fear and mental blocks, which in turn can increase injury risk. So I just want to harp on it one more time, allow for a healthy amount of trial and error. And I just like these memes from The Office. I'm such a perfectionist that I'd kind of rather not do it at all than do a crappy version. I could really relate to this as a high schooler. I used to be kind of a perfectionist, so that's why I harp on this so much in this PowerPoint, because it would just stop me from doing anything. I would just stop weightlifting because I felt like I wasn't doing it right. I would just stop doing all of these things if I didn't feel like I was doing it perfectly. So don't let that kill your progress. Okay, secret number three, and maybe the most important secret, is how to create consistency. So maybe you know what to do in the gym, but you're thinking that you just do not have time to add another extra hour of practice for your cheerleaders, or there's no way you can get access to a weight room for your team. So remember, consistency over perfectionism. There's some ways to go around this. Create flexibility for your athletes by allowing them to do their workouts on their own time. Create accountability for your athletes by reporting to the group weekly, and then emphasizing year-round training. Find a way that's easiest for you. So for example, University of Toledo, they wanted to have their athletes lifting in the weight room, but they had no resources, no access to a trainer, and no time for the coach to be in the weight room with them. So they couldn't get access to their athletic department's weight room. So instead, they decided to use me to program their lifts online and distribute it to their teams so that they had a structured plan and the coach didn't have to have any involvement with it. They just went to their school's rec center, completed the lifts on their own, reported it in the app, and their coach could see from the app that they had completed the workout. So, some strategies for implementation. Your time is valuable and limited. Don't do more work than you have to. Body weight is better than nothing. I know I harped on weight training during this presentation because I truly believe that weight training is king, but I also harped on not being a perfectionist. So body weight is better than nothing. Schedule a lift in the last 30 minutes of practice if you have to. And then this is really what I suggest: create or purchase a program for your athletes and allow them to do it on their own with a way to input results. So this is how, one, you have to work less because they are doing it on their own time. You don't have to schedule that extra time. And then two, you're empowering your athletes to take control of this and to make it their responsibility and to make it something for their own self-improvement. So I am not going to go into this in depth in this presentation, but what I sell to cheer teams is called the Strength for Cheer program, where all the athletes on the app get access to their workout. They can see videos next to each lift on how to do it, and they can input their results, and their coach can see if they did it or not. And so some teams use this together in their weight room as a team. Other teams don't have access to the weight room or don't want to add another practice time, and so their athletes do this on their own. But either way, the whole team is on the same structured and consistent plan, and they actually do it year round. So that kind of covers all of these points that I was trying to make throughout this presentation. Then lastly, make the program enjoyable and empowering so that it's something that they continue to do year round. And again, when I say enjoyable, I don't mean that like they're going to love every second of every lift, but they're going to be able to see their progress and see how it benefits them. Weightlifting is the missing piece of the puzzle. Many teams hire tumbling instructors, stunt coaches, choreographers, but how many cheer teams do you know of that have a consistent year-round strength and conditioning program or strength and conditioning coach specifically for their team? I don't know of very many at all at the high school level. I do know that Ohio State does, Kentucky, Alabama, other big college teams who are under athletics at their school, they have a strength and conditioning coach that is designated probably just to them and one other sport. At Ohio State, our strength coach was for basketball and cheer, and that was it, their full-time job, making sure that we got what we needed. So after learning about all of this, I just wanted to leave you with a question. Do you think strength training / weightlifting would benefit your team? And if so, I have some free things for you guys. So if you scan this QR code like I promised, sorry, my picture is in the way, you will get your strength training for cheerleaders coaches checklist that goes over and kind of summarizes some of my key points from today that you can look back on. You'll also get access to this PowerPoint, and then I will also send you a video of the USA cheer warm-up routine if you submit your information from this QR code. If you have any questions, please reach out to me via email, mariawisman@everyoneshouldlift.com, and I would love to help your cheer team or you as a cheerleader get stronger, improve your skills, and reduce your injury risk. Thank you.